I woke up in complete darkness, my left wrist chained to a rusted pipe, the smell of mold filling my lungs with every shallow breath. For 36 years, I had been the invisible daughter, the one who was never quite good enough, never quite loved enough. I accepted it. I stayed silent. I thought silence was the price of belonging, but I never imagined my own sister would chain me in our parents' basement and leave me to die. The last thing I saw before she locked that door was her smile, cold, satisfied, triumphant. Her words still echo in my head. You deserve to disappear. This empire is mine now. She didn't know I was recording everything. She didn't know our family doctor had already started asking questions. And she certainly didn't know that 3 months later, she would stand in a courtroom, confident that no one could prove anything, until my doctor spoke 6 words that made her face turn white. Those 6 words changed everything. Have you ever trusted someone with your life, only to discover they were counting down the days until you were gone? My name is Amy Ford. I'm 36 years old, a financial accountant at a mid-size firm in the city, and I have a heart condition that requires daily medication to keep me alive. For most of my adult life, I've been the daughter who left, the one who built a career instead of staying home, the one who chose freedom over family obligation. I never realized that choice would nearly cost me everything. The phone call came on a Tuesday afternoon, 2 weeks before everything fell apart. Mom's voice was strained, confused. An insurance company had sent a letter flagging unusual billing patterns in their medical claims. Dad couldn't make sense of the financial language. They needed someone who understood numbers. They needed me, not because they valued my opinion. In 36 years, they'd rarely asked for it, but because I was useful. I told myself it didn't matter why they called. They called. That was enough. I drove the 4 hours home on a gray October morning, my heart medication tucked in my purse in a fresh sealed bottle. 8 months had passed since my last visit. The house looked the same, white siding, black shutters, Mom's roses still blooming despite the chill. But when I walked through the front door, something felt different. The air was heavier somehow, tense. Leela greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. My younger sister had always been the golden child, the one who stayed close, who sacrificed her own ambitions to care for our aging parents at least. That was the story everyone believed. She hugged me briefly, her body rigid. You didn't have to come all this way. It's probably just a clerical error. I can handle it. At dinner that night, the familiar dynamics played out like a script we'd rehearsed for decades. Every conversation circled back to Lila, how tired she was, how much she'd given up, how lucky our parents were to have her. My recent promotion went unmentioned. My life in the city was treated as a footnote, something vaguely selfish. I smiled and nodded and swallowed the old familiar ache. Over dessert, Mom mentioned casually that they'd updated their will 70% to Leela, 30% to me. Leela has sacrificed so much to be here for us, Mom said, patting Lila's hand. It's only fair. I nodded again, the ache deepening into something sharper. I didn't argue. I never argued. Silence had always been easier than fighting battles I couldn't win. Later that evening, Aunt Ruth stopped by. She was Mom's younger sister, a widow who'd always treated me with a warmth my own parents seemed incapable of. In the garden, away from listening ears, she gripped my arm and whispered urgently, Amy, I've tried to warn your parents for years. Something is wrong with Lila. They won't listen. They think I'm jealous, causing trouble. But please, be careful. Watch everything. I wanted to ask what she meant, but Mom called us inside before I could respond. That night, I went to bed with Aunt Ruth's words circling in my mind, unable to shake the feeling that I was missing something important. I woke around 2 inches the morning, mouth dry, needing water. The hallway was dark, but as I passed Leela's room, I heard her voice low, tight, panicked. She was on the phone. The insurance company sent a letter. She's here now, asking questions. We need to move faster, Mark. I don't have the money yet. I froze in the shadows, barely breathing. What money? Move faster on what? And who was Mark? I stood there in the darkness, my heart pounding against my ribs, and realized I didn't know my sister at all. I barely slept the rest of that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Leela's panicked voice echoing in my head. The insurance company sent a letter. She's here now. We need to move faster. By morning, I had dark circles under my eyes and a growing knot of dread in my stomach. I needed answers, But I had no idea how to get them without tipping Lila off that I'd overheard her phone call. At breakfast, I tried to act normal. I poured myself coffee, asked Mom about her doctor's appointments, made small talk about the weather. But Lila watched me the entire time, her eyes sharp and calculating. She must have sensed something had shifted, because halfway through the meal, she set down her fork and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, cold, almost threatening. You know, Amy, you've been silent so long that no one in this family considers your opinion anymore, she said, her voice casual but her words cutting like glass. Mom and Dad consult me on everything, the finances, the medical decisions, the house. You're basically a guest here. Mom didn't even flinch. Dad kept eating his eggs. I sat there, stunned, feeling the truth of her words, even as I recognized them for what they were. A calculated strike designed to make me feel powerless, to discourage me from asking questions. But underneath her confident delivery, I heard something else, desperation. She was trying too hard to push me away, which meant she was afraid of what I might find. After breakfast, I told my parents I was going for a drive to clear my head. Instead, I went straight to Aunt Ruth's house on the other side of town. She opened the door before I even knocked, as if she'd been expecting me. You heard something. Didn't you? She asked, leading me into her small living room filled with family photos and the smell of lavender. I told her about the phone call, about Lila's strange behavior, about the words that had been haunting me all night. Ruth listened without interrupting, then disappeared into her bedroom and returned with a worn notebook. 5 years ago, I noticed Lila spending money she shouldn't have, Ruth said, settling into her chair across from me. Designer clothes, when she claimed she had no income. A new car, she said, was a gift from a friend. Expensive vacations she couldn't possibly afford, I told your mother. I showed her bank statements I'd found, receipts that didn't make sense. Do you know what she did? I shook my head. She accused me of being jealous, Ruth continued, her voice heavy with old pain. She said I was trying to cause family drama, trying to turn her against her own daughter. After that, I was pushed out. Holiday invitations stopped coming. Phone calls went unanswered. I became the difficult sister who couldn't be trusted. She handed me the notebook. Inside were pages and pages of observations, dates, suspicious incidents, 5 years of watching from the outside, documenting everything she couldn't prove. Your silence was never virtue, Amy, Ruth said, meeting my eyes. It was permission. The longer good people stay quiet, the further the wicked advance. I stayed quiet too long. I let them push me away instead of fighting harder. Don't make my mistake. I drove back to my parents' house with the notebook hidden in my purse and Ruth's words burning in my chest. The insurance letter was still on the kitchen counter where Mom had left it. I picked it up and carried it to my old bedroom, locking the door behind me. With my accountant's eye, I examined every line. The insurance company had flagged $47,000 in suspicious charges over 18 months, duplicate billings for the same procedures. Treatments at medical facilities my mother had never visited, medications that were never prescribed by her doctors. This wasn't a clerical error. This was systematic fraud, carefully constructed to avoid detection. Someone had been stealing from my parents' medical fund, and they'd been doing it for a long time. My hands trembled as I set the letter down. I thought about Lila's desperate phone call, about the mysterious mark and the money she didn't have yet. The pieces were starting to form a picture I didn't want to see. That afternoon, Dr. Wright stopped by to check on Mom. He'd been our family physician for 15 years, a kind man in his early 60s who remembered every birthday and never rushed through appointments. After examining Mom, he found me in the living room and frowned. "Amy, you don't look well," he said, studying my face with professional concern. "Your color is off. Have you been taking your heart medication regularly?" I assured him I had. I'd brought a fresh bottle, sealed and full. Dr. Wright didn't look convinced. "Any dizziness? Irregular heartbeat?" Before I could answer, Leela appeared in the doorway, her smile perfectly calibrated. "She's just tired from the long drive," she said smoothly, sliding between us. "I'll make sure she gets plenty of rest." Dr. Wright held my gaze for a moment longer, then handed me his business card. "Call me directly," he said quietly, "anytime, day or night." That evening, after everyone had gone to bed, I crept down the hallway to Leela's home office. I told myself I was looking for more financial records, something to confirm or deny what the insurance letter suggested. The door was unlocked. Inside, Her desk was cluttered with papers and unopened mail. A drawer on the left side was slightly open, as if she'd been rushing and forgotten to close it. I pulled it wider and found a document that made my blood run cold. A loan agreement, $150,000 borrowed from someone named Mark Sullivan, interest rate 18%, due in 45 days. I stared at the numbers, my accountant's brain calculating automatically. This wasn't just fraud. My sister was drowning in debt, and the deadline was approaching fast. Desperate people do desperate things, and I was starting to understand just how desperate Leela had become. I couldn't sleep that night. The loan agreement burned in my mind like a brand $150,000 at 18% interest, due in 45 days. That kind of desperation doesn't come from nowhere. There had to be more, and I was determined to find it. The next morning, I waited until Leela left for what she called a doctor's appointment, and my parents settled into their routine of morning television. Then I locked myself in my old bedroom and made a phone call that would change everything. I dialed the family attorney, Mr. Henderson, a man who had handled my parents' legal affairs for over 20 years. I kept my voice casual, professional. "Hi, Mr. Henderson. This is Amy Ford. I'm helping my parents organize some documents for tax planning purposes, and I wanted to confirm a few details about the current estate arrangements." He was happy to help. We chatted about the property, the accounts, the basic structure of the will. Then he said something that made my heart stop. Of course, the original 50-50 split was quite standard for families with 2 children, but your sister explained that you preferred the revised arrangement. She said you felt guilty about not being present for your parents' care and wanted Lila to receive a larger share. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. "I see," I managed to say. "And when exactly did I communicate this preference?" "Oh, about 14 months ago. Lila brought a signed letter from you authorizing the change. I have it on file if you'd like a copy." A signed letter. I had never written any letter. I had never agreed to anything. For over a year, Lila had been lying to the attorney, to our parents, to everyone. She had forged my signature and stolen my inheritance right in front of the people who were supposed to protect me. I thanked Mr. Henderson and hung up, my hands shaking. Now I knew Leela was capable of sustained, calculated deception. She wasn't just stressed or desperate in the moment. She had been planning and executing a long-term scheme for years. I needed to understand the full scope of what she had done. I crept into Dad's study while my parents dozed in the living room. His desk was cluttered but organized in that particular way older men keep their finances, stacks of bank statements, insurance papers, tax documents going back a decade. I pulled everything I could find and spread it across the floor. With my accountant's training, I began cross-referencing the suspicious insurance claims with the bank statements. The pattern emerged within an hour. Over the past 5 years, Lila had siphoned approximately $200,000 from the family medical fund. She had created fake invoices, billed for treatments my mother never received, and funneled the payments into accounts she controlled. The $150,000 loan from Mark Sullivan suddenly made terrible sense. Lila had tried to replace the stolen money through a real estate investment. It had failed. Now, she owed Mark on top of everything she had already taken, $350,000 in total. If anyone discovered the truth, she would face prison. And I had just discovered the truth. I finally understood why Leela was so desperate to push me away. I wasn't just an inconvenience to her. I was an existential threat. The moment I reported what I knew, her entire life would collapse. I didn't waste another minute. I photographed every document with my phone, the bank statements, the insurance claims, the loan agreement, the forged letter on file with the attorney. I opened my email and sent everything to Aunt Ruth with a message that still haunts me. "If anything happens to me, anything, give these files to the police immediately. Do not wait. Do not give Leela a chance to explain. Just call the authorities." Then I texted my lawyer friend in the city. "Family emergency. Possible fraud case involving my sister. If you don't hear from me in 24 hours, call my Aunt Ruth and contact the authorities. I'm not being dramatic. Please take this seriously." As I gathered the documents to put them back, I noticed my medication bottle sitting on the nightstand. I picked it up and frowned. It felt lighter than it should have. I had brought a fresh sealed bottle enough pills for 2 weeks, but when I shook it, the rattle seemed wrong. I opened the cap and counted. There should have been 28 pills. There were 12. My mind raced, but I talked myself out of the obvious conclusion. The bottle had been sealed. I must have miscounted at the pharmacy. I was stressed, not thinking clearly. I set the bottle down and focused on what mattered most: getting out of this house. I packed my bag in under 5 minutes. I called for a rideshare on my phone and watched the app show the driver approaching. 7 minutes away. I could make it. I grabbed my purse, my overnight bag, and headed for the front door. The foyer seemed longer than I remembered. My legs felt heavy, unsteady. I told myself it was just adrenaline, just fear. But halfway across the marble floor, my heart stuttered in my chest, not the normal rhythm I'd lived with for years. Something wrong, something dangerous. My vision blurred at the edges. I reached for the door frame, but my hand found only air. I went down hard, my bag spilling across the floor, my phone skittering toward the stairs. I tried to push myself up, but my arms wouldn't cooperate. The last thing I saw was a pair of expensive heels clicking across the marble toward me. Leela's face appeared above mine, and she was smiling. "You almost made it," she said, her voice cold and satisfied. "Almost." My phone buzzed beside me, the rideshare arriving. Leela picked it up, tapped the screen, and I watched her cancel the ride. Then her fingers moved again, typing. Later I would learn she sent a message to Aunt Ruth, pretending to be me. "Changed my mind about dinner tomorrow. Heading back to the city early. We'll call next week." She hit send and looked at someone standing in the shadows behind her. "Help me move her," Leela said. "We're out of time." I woke to darkness so complete it felt like being buried alive. Cold concrete pressed against my cheek. The air was thick with mold and the smell of decay, the kind of damp that seeps into your bones and never leaves. I tried to move and felt the bite of metal around my left wrist, a handcuff attached to something solid. I pulled harder and heard the rattle of chain against rusted pipe echoing in the blackness. My heart was pounding, but not in the normal way. The rhythm was wrong, skipping beats, stuttering like an engine running out of fuel. I knew with clinical certainty what was happening to my body. Without my medication, my heart condition would deteriorate rapidly. I had maybe 72 hours, maybe less, given the stress and the cold. I was in some kind of storage room, I realized, as my eyes slowly adjusted. Shapes emerged from the darkness, old furniture covered in sheets, boxes stacked against walls, the outline of stairs leading up to a door. The basement, the old storage area beneath my parents' house that no one had entered in years. The walls were thick stone, built decades ago. Sound would not carry. I could scream until my throat bled, and no one upstairs would hear a thing. I don't know how long I sat there in the dark before I heard the scrape of a door opening above. Light cut down the stairs, a flashlight beam that made me squint after so much blackness. Footsteps descended slow and deliberate. Then Lila appeared, standing over me with the flashlight pointed at my face. She looked different. The mask she had worn our entire lives was gone. In its place was something cold, something that had been hiding beneath the surface for years, waiting for this moment. "You're awake," she said. "Good. I wanted you to understand before the end." I tried to speak, but my throat was dry, my voice barely a whisper. "Why?" Leela laughed, a sound without any warmth. "You want to know why, Amy? Really? Why? Because you left. You got to escape while I was trapped here. You packed your bags and drove away to your apartment, your career, your freedom. And what happened to me? Leela, you're the good daughter, Leela. Stay close to Mom and Dad, Leela. Sacrifice everything." She began to pace, her heels clicking against the concrete. "For 15 years, I've been their unpaid nurse, their therapist, their emotional punching bag. Every holiday, every crisis, every 3 a.m. phone call about Dad's blood pressure or Mom's anxiety, that was me. I held Mom's hand through chemotherapy while you sent flowers from the city. I managed Dad's finances while you climbed your corporate ladder. And what did I get for it? Not gratitude, not freedom, just more expectations, more obligations, a prison made of family duty. I stared at her, seeing my sister clearly for the first time. The resentment in her eyes had been building for years, maybe decades. I had been too focused on my own pain, my own invisibility, to notice hers. "That money," Lila continued, her voice rising, "I earned it. Every dollar was payment for the life I gave up while you built your precious career, while you traveled, while you were free. I deserved compensation for being the daughter who stayed, the daughter who sacrificed, the daughter who gave up everything." She crouched down to my level, her face inches from mine. And now you come back with your accountant eyes, ready to destroy everything I've built, ready to expose me, send me to prison, take away the only payment I ever received for my suffering. No, you've always been invisible in this family, Amy. Mom and Dad barely noticed when you left. They won't notice when you're gone for good. You'll disappear for real this time. She pulled my phone from her pocket and held it up like a trophy. I've already sent messages to everyone who matters. Amy had a breakdown, needed space, left suddenly for the city. So sad but not surprising. You've always been the fragile one, the daughter who couldn't handle family pressure. When they find your body, if they ever do, it will be a tragedy. A woman with a heart condition who wandered off during a mental health crisis and died alone. Not a crime. Just another sad story. She stood and moved toward the stairs. I switched your medication bottle the first night you arrived. You've been taking half doses for 3 days. Without your pills, your heart will fail within 72 hours, maybe sooner given the stress. She paused at the bottom of the stairs, looking back at me one final time. Goodbye, Amy. I'd say I'm sorry, but I'm not. You escaped when I couldn't. Consider this the price of your freedom. The door closed behind her. The darkness swallowed me whole. I let myself cry for exactly 5 minutes. I allowed the fear and the grief and the betrayal to wash over me in waves. Then I stopped. I wiped my face with my free hand and began to think. I was not going to die in this basement. I was not going to disappear quietly while Lila continued her life above me, pretending to be the grieving sister who lost poor, fragile Amy. I took inventory of what I had. My left wrist was cuffed to a pipe, but my right hand was free. I still wore my smartwatch. I pressed the button, and the screen glowed to life. 34% battery. No cellular signal this deep underground. But the watch had a voice recording function. I made a decision. I would not record continuously and drain the power. I would document only the most critical information and preserve the battery for as long as possible. I pressed record and whispered into the tiny microphone. My name is Amy Ford. I am being held in the basement of the Ford family home. My sister Leela has imprisoned me here and removed my heart medication. This is premeditated attempted murder. I stopped the recording and turned my attention to my restraints. The pipe I was chained to was old, probably original to the house. Decades of moisture had corroded the joints. I found the weakest point and began to work at it, twisting, pulling, testing. Millimeters of movement. It would take hours, maybe days, but I had no other choice. Time became meaningless in the dark. My heart stuttered more frequently, each irregular beat reminding me of the countdown I was living under. I recorded another entry, my voice barely above a whisper. If I die here, find this watch. Find Lila. She said I earned this, that I escaped while she was trapped. She's been planning this, waiting for the right moment. I was too visible, too dangerous. Now I'm invisible again. I paused, gathering my strength. But I refused to disappear quietly. Day 1. I'm still alive, and I'm not done fighting. The hours blurred together in the darkness. I lost track of time completely, measuring my existence only by the increasingly erratic rhythm of my heart and the slow progress I made on the corroded pipe fitting. I rationed my energy, carefully working in bursts when I felt strong enough, resting when the dizziness became too severe. I recorded voice memos during my most lucid moments, preserving every detail I could remember about Leela's confession, about the fraud, about where I was being held. I kept the recordings short to save battery. 28%, 23%. Each percentage point felt like sand slipping through an hourglass. In the silence, my mind wandered to memories I had spent years trying to forget. The birthday party when I was 12, where Mom forgot to order my cake because she was too busy planning Lila's dance recital. The graduation ceremony where Dad spent the entire reception talking about Leela's college prospects instead of my valedictorian speech. The Christmas dinners where I sat at the end of the table, invisible, while the family orbited around my younger sister like she was the sun. For years, those memories had been sources of pain, wounds I picked at in my weakest moments. But now, chained in the darkness, I transformed them into something else. Fuel. They made me invisible because it was convenient for them. They overlooked me because noticing me would have required effort they didn't want to give. And Lila was making me disappear now because I had finally become visible. I had seen the truth. I had documented it. I had become dangerous. I would not die in the dark. I would not give her the satisfaction. By what I estimated was hour 36. I had created real movement in the pipe fitting. The joint was loosening, grinding against decades of corrosion. Not enough to escape yet, but enough to give me hope. What I didn't know then, what I only learned later, was that I wasn't the only one fighting for my life. Aunt Ruth received my fake text message the evening I was taken. She read it twice, frowning at her phone. The words were wrong. I always wrote going home when I meant my apartment in the city. I never said heading back, and I would never cancel our dinner plans with a text message. After everything she had shared with me about Leela, Ruth tried calling my phone. It went straight to voicemail. She called my parents' house, and Lila answered with a cheerful voice that set Ruth's teeth on edge. "Oh, Amy left early this morning, said she had a work emergency. You know how she's always running off." Ruth hung up without saying goodbye. I had never mentioned any work emergency. Something was very wrong. That night, Ruth drove to my parents' house and parked across the street, watching the windows for any sign of me. She saw Leela moving through the living room, smiling, relaxed. She saw my parents watching television as if nothing had happened, but she never saw me. The next morning, Dr. Wright called to confirm my cardiology appointment scheduled for the following week. He got my voicemail. He tried again an hour later, same result. Concerned, he called my parents' house. Leela answered and explained that I had returned to the city unexpectedly, some kind of family emergency at work. Dr. Wright thanked her and hung up, but something nagged at him. In 15 years of treating my heart condition, I had never missed an appointment without calling to reschedule. Never, not once. He pulled my medical file and reviewed my medication requirements. If I had been without my metoprolol for 48 hours or more, I could be experiencing dangerous arrhythmia, the kind that leads to cardiac arrest. He found the emergency contact number I had listed on my intake forms years ago and dialed. "Mrs. Patterson, this is Dr. Thomas Wright. I'm Amy Ford's cardiologist. I'm worried about her. Something isn't right." Ruth was still parked outside my parents' house when her phone rang. She listened to Dr. Wright's concerns, and the pieces fell into place, with terrible clarity: the fake text, the lie about a work emergency, Amy's heart condition, and missing medication. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was something much darker. "Dr. Wright, I need you to come to the Ford house right now. Don't tell them why. Just come." 20 minutes later, Ruth watched Dr. Wright's car pull into the driveway. She met him at the front door, and together they rang the bell. Leela answered, surprise flickering across her face before she composed herself. "Dr. Wright? Aunt Ruth? What brings you both here?" She had no choice but to let them in. Refusing would have raised immediate suspicion. While Lila made tea in the kitchen, Ruth excused herself to use the bathroom. She walked slowly down the hallway, past family photos and closed doors, until she reached the entrance to the basement. She paused there, barely breathing, and listened. At first, nothing. Then, faint but unmistakable rhythmic tapping against metal. 3 slow, 3 fast, 3 slow. SOS. Ruth's blood ran cold. She walked calmly back to the living room, smiled at Leela, and made her excuses. "I just remembered I have an appointment. Dr. Wright, would you mind staying to check on my sister? I worry about her blood pressure." In her car, hands shaking, Ruth dialed 911. "I need to report a possible kidnapping. My niece may be held against her will in the basement of her family home." She gave the address, then called Dr. Wright's cell. "Stay there. Keep Leela distracted. Police are on their way." In the basement, my strength was fading. My vision blurred more frequently, and the irregular heartbeat that had been a nuisance was becoming something more dangerous. But the pipe fitting had loosened significantly. I could feel it giving way, grinding against rust and age. Not enough to escape yet, but close. So close. I used my last reserves of energy to tap the SOS pattern one more time against the pipe, hoping against hope that someone above might hear. Then I heard something that made my failing heart leap footsteps above me. Multiple sets, moving quickly. Voices I could barely make out through the thick floor. My mother sounding confused and frightened. Leela, her voice tight with controlled panic, talking fast. And then a new voice, one I didn't recognize. Male, authoritative, official. "Ma'am, we have a report of a possible emergency. We need to search the premises." My heart pounded so hard I thought it might give out right there. Police. Someone had called the police. But even as hope surged through me, doubt followed close behind. Lila had talked her way out of everything for years. She had fooled our parents, the attorney, everyone who should have seen through her. Could she talk her way out of this too? I heard Lila's voice above me, tight with forced calm. Officer, there's nothing in the basement but old furniture. No one has been down there in years. Then another voice, firm and unwavering. Ma'am, we need to verify. Please step aside. More footsteps. The sound of someone trying a door handle. It's locked, a man said. Do you have the key? Lila's response was barely audible, but I could imagine her mind racing, searching for another excuse, another lie. Then Dr. Wright's voice cut through clearly. I'm this family's physician. If there's any possibility someone is in medical distress down there, we need to access that room immediately. I'm invoking medical emergency authority. A pause, then the sharp crack of wood splintering as someone forced the lock. Light flooded down the stairs, and I tried to call out, but my voice was barely a whisper. Footsteps descended rapidly. A flashlight beam swept across the cluttered basement and found me slumped against the wall, my skin gray, my lips tinged blue, one hand still wrapped around the pipe fitting I had been working to loosen for 2 days. I was still fighting, even at the end. I was still fighting. Dr. Wright pushed past the officer and dropped to his knees beside me, his fingers pressed against my neck, checking for a pulse. She's alive, but barely. Dangerous arrhythmia. We need an ambulance now. She's in cardiac crisis. Everything after that became a blur of motion and noise. Someone cut the handcuff from my wrist. Hands lifted me onto a stretcher. I remember the shock of cool night air on my face as they carried me out of the house. I remember the red and blue lights painting the front lawn in alternating colors. And I remember, with perfect clarity, the moment I locked eyes with Lila in the hallway. She stood between 2 police officers, her face pale, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. Neither of us spoke. Everything that needed to be said had already been said in that basement. I held her gaze until the paramedics loaded me into the ambulance and the doors closed between us. I woke in a hospital bed with tubes in my arm and monitors beeping steadily beside me. A police officer sat in the corner of the room, waiting. Protocol required them to interview victims of suspected kidnapping as soon as they regained consciousness, and I was more than ready to talk. I told them everything, the medication theft that had started the moment I arrived at my parents' house, the imprisonment in the basement, every word of Lila's confession, every detail of her resentment and her planning. I gave them my smartwatch and explained the voice recordings I had made in the darkness. I gave them Aunt Ruth's contact information and told them about the evidence I had emailed her before my collapse. I told them about the forged letter changing the will, the $200,000 in embezzlement, the loan from Mark Sullivan. By the time I finished, the officer had filled nearly 20 pages of notes. That evening, the police arrested Lila at our parents' house. She was charged with kidnapping, attempted murder, and fraud. Mark Sullivan was brought in for questioning the same night. He immediately requested a lawyer and refused to answer any questions. But I knew his silence wouldn't last. People like Mark always looked out for themselves first. Aunt Ruth came to see me the next morning. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, but there was something like triumph in her expression. She sat beside my bed and took my hand. I have something for you, she said, pulling a worn notebook from her purse. 3 months ago, I called Lila about your mother's medication schedule. During that call, she accidentally mentioned she had to fix the money situation before anyone noticed. I didn't understand what she meant at the time, but something about it bothered me. I was part of that conversation, so I had every right to record it. It's all here, along with 5 years of observations, dates, incidents, financial inconsistencies I noticed but couldn't prove. She pressed the notebook into my hands. I tried to warn your parents, Amy. They wouldn't listen. They called me jealous, paranoid, a troublemaker. So I stopped talking and started documenting. I was waiting for someone who would believe me, someone who could actually do something with the evidence. I'm just sorry it took this long. 3 days later, I was strong enough to meet with the district attorney. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who listened to my story without interruption, then laid out the prosecution's plan. They wanted to move quickly, she explained. The kidnapping charges alone could put Lila away for years. But I stopped her. I don't just want her convicted for what she did to me, I said. I want the full scope of her fraud exposed, every dollar she stole from my parents over 5 years, every lie she told to the attorney, to the family, to everyone. I want her to face all of it. The DA studied me for a long moment, then nodded. That will take more time. We'll need forensic accountants to analyze the financial records. I handed her my phone. I photographed everything before she took me bank statements, insurance claims, the forged letter, the loan agreement. It's all there. Over the next 2 weeks, a team of forensic accountants worked through the documents I had gathered. They confirmed what I already knew. Approximately $200,000 had been siphoned from my parents' medical fund over 5 years. Combined with the loan from Mark Sullivan, Lila's total debt exceeded $350,000. I made one additional request during this time. I wanted a media blackout on my survival until Lila was formally indicted. I don't want her to know exactly what evidence we have, I explained. Let her think she still has a chance. Let her get comfortable. When we walk into that courtroom, I want her completely unprepared for what's coming. 2 weeks after my rescue, I stood in my hospital room, finally strong enough to leave. My heart was stable again, my medication adjusted, my body slowly recovering from the trauma it had endured. I was packing my few belongings when my lawyer called. Lila posted bail this morning, she said. She's hired Richard Thornton as her defense attorney. I recognized the name, the most expensive criminal lawyer in the state, known for getting wealthy clients acquitted through aggressive tactics and media manipulation. There's more, my lawyer continued. She's already giving interviews. She went on Channel 7 this morning and told them, "You've had mental health struggles for years." She's calling this a tragic misunderstanding fueled by sibling rivalry. She's playing the victim, Amy, and some people are believing her. I felt my jaw tighten. The old Amy might have crumbled at this news, might have let Lila's lies go unchallenged because fighting back was too hard, too exhausting. But I wasn't the old Amy anymore. I had survived 2 days chained in a basement. I had stared death in the face and refused to surrender. I was done being invisible, done being silent, done letting my sister control the narrative. Then let's give her the trial she's asking for, I said. Let her think she's winning. When we walk into that courtroom, I want her to have no idea what's about to hit her. The next 6 months became a war of patience and strategy. Lila's defense attorney filed motion after motion, requesting delays, challenging evidence, trying to postpone the inevitable. But the prosecution argued successfully that the overwhelming evidence and concerns about witness intimidation warranted moving forward. A trial date was set, and while the legal system ground through its processes, Lila launched her counterattack. She hired private investigators to dig into my past, searching for anything that could discredit me. She created a public relations campaign portraying herself as the real victim, the devoted daughter being persecuted by her mentally unstable sister. She gave tearful interviews to local news stations, dabbing her eyes with tissues as she described my supposed history of emotional breakdowns. Amy has struggled with her mental health for years, she told one reporter. I was trying to help her during a crisis, and somehow that's been twisted into something criminal. This is a family tragedy, not a crime. Some of our extended family began to believe her. Cousins who had barely spoken to me in years suddenly had opinions about my mental state. But those who watched Lila closely noticed something else. She had lost weight, her clothes hanging loosely on her frame. She snapped at her own attorney during pre-trial hearings. She checked her phone obsessively, as if waiting for bad news. The stress was eating her alive, no matter how composed she tried to appear. During one hearing, when the judge denied her motion to exclude my smartwatch recordings as evidence, I watched her hand tremble as she wrote notes on her legal pad. The cracks in her facade were spreading. Then came the discovery that shattered her defense strategy completely. During the pre-trial evidence exchange, the prosecution obtained Lila's text message history with Mark Sullivan. What they found was devastating. In messages sent weeks before my imprisonment, Lila had discussed her backup plan if things went wrong. "If it comes down to it, I'll say you forced me," she had written. "Your fingerprints are on the handcuffs. Your car was seen at the house. You're the violent ex-boyfriend who threatened me into helping. I'll cry on the stand. Everyone will believe me." She had been planning to sacrifice Mark from the very beginning. When Mark's attorney showed him these messages, his loyalty evaporated in an instant. Within 48 hours, Mark accepted a plea deal from the prosecution, full testimony against Lila, in exchange for a reduced sentence. He would tell the jury everything, the planning conversations, his role in moving my unconscious body to the basement, Lila's instructions about disposing of my medication. Lila learned of his betrayal the morning of jury selection. A bailiff later told prosecutors what he heard in the courthouse bathroom: Lila screaming into her phone, her voice raw with rage. "You promised! You swore you would never turn on me!" The composed, sympathetic victim she had been performing for the cameras was nowhere to be found. The real Lila was emerging, and she was terrified. But the worst blow came 3 months before trial, when a woman named Sarah contacted the district attorney's office. "I never knew Sarah existed until the prosecutor told me her story." 4 years earlier, Sarah had worked with Lila at a financial consulting firm. Lila had approached her about a guaranteed investment opportunity, convincing Sarah to lend her $50,000. The money was never repaid. When Sarah threatened to report the theft, Lila responded with subtle but unmistakable threats, implications about Sarah's job security, references to the custody battle Sarah was fighting for her children. Sarah was too afraid to pursue it. She walked away from the money and tried to forget. But when she saw news coverage of my case, she recognized the pattern, the manipulation, the financial exploitation, the willingness to destroy anyone who threatened exposure. Sarah came forward to testify. The prosecution added her testimony to establish what they called prior bad acts, legal proof that my case was not an isolated incident, but part of a calculated pattern of fraud and predation. Lila had done this before. She would have done it again. The trial began on a cold Tuesday morning. The courtroom was packed with reporters, family members, and strangers drawn by the sensational coverage. Lila arrived, dressed in modest, sympathetic clothing, her hair pulled back simply, her makeup minimal. She attempted to smile at the jury as she took her seat, but those of us watching closely could see the truth. Her hands trembled slightly in her lap. Her smile never reached her eyes. When the courtroom door banged open as a latecomer rushed in, she startled visibly, her composure cracking for just a moment. Her attorney presented her defense with practiced confidence. Amy Ford was a stressed, emotionally unstable woman who had misinterpreted a family dispute. The so-called imprisonment was actually Lila trying to help her sister during a mental health crisis. "This is a tragic case of sibling misunderstanding," he argued, "not attempted murder. Lila Ford is a devoted daughter who sacrificed her own dreams to care for her aging parents. She is not a criminal. She is a victim of her sister's delusions." Lila nodded along to every word, but during a break, a court reporter saw her in the hallway, standing alone with her eyes closed and her lips moving, silently rehearsing lines, perhaps, or praying, or simply trying to hold herself together as everything she had built crumbled around her. The prosecution called witness after witness. Mark Sullivan described every detail of the plan in exchange for his reduced sentence. Sarah told her story of manipulation and theft. Aunt Ruth presented her notebook of 5 years of documented suspicions. The forensic accountant explained the $200,000 in embezzlement. And then came the final witness. The prosecution calls Dr. Thomas Wright. Lila's attorney objected immediately. What new information can a family doctor possibly provide? This is cumulative and unnecessary. The judge overruled him. Dr. Wright took the stand. Lila watched him with forced calm. After all, what harm could a doctor do? He would simply confirm my heart condition and the medical records already in evidence. The prosecutor approached the witness stand. "Dr. Wright, based on your 15 years treating Amy Ford and your medical examination after her rescue, what is your professional conclusion about what happened to her?" Dr. Wright turned to face the jury directly, his voice steady, certain, and devastating. "She was dying," he said, "and not by accident." The courtroom fell completely silent as Dr. Wright continued his testimony. Every person in that room seemed to hold their breath. "I have treated Amy Ford's cardiac condition for 15 years, he said, his voice carrying the weight of medical authority. "When I found her in that basement, she was in advanced arrhythmia, the specific pattern that occurs only after prolonged medication deprivation. Her lips were blue, her pulse was barely detectable. Another few hours and we would have been recovering a body instead of saving a life." He paused, and I saw the jury lean forward. But here's what the prosecution hasn't told you yet. The silence became almost unbearable. 6 months before this incident, Amy was hospitalized overnight after visiting her family for Thanksgiving. Same symptoms, unexplained cardiac episode. At the time, I attributed it to holiday stress. I was wrong. Wright turned to look directly at Lila. "Now I believe someone was already tampering with her medication during that visit. The attack that nearly killed Amy wasn't impulsive. It was a rehearsal. Lila Ford had done this before. She tested her method, observed the results, and refined her approach. What happened in that basement was premeditated, attempted murder, planned over at least 6 months. I watched Lila's face drain of color. Her attorney jumped to his feet, requesting a sidebar. The judge denied it without hesitation. The damage was done. Everyone now understood that my near death wasn't a desperate act born from sudden panic. It was the culmination of a plan, carefully tested and refined. My sister had tried to kill me before. When that attempt didn't fully succeed, she had simply waited for another opportunity. The prosecutor moved forward methodically, presenting each piece of evidence like stones building an inescapable wall. My smartwatch recordings played through the courtroom speakers. Lila's voice cold and unmistakable. "You've always been invisible in this family. Now you'll disappear for real." I heard several jurors gasp. The recording continued, capturing every word of Lila's confession, her explanation of how she had switched my medication, her certainty that no one would ever suspect her. Aunt Ruth's recorded phone call followed, playing the moment when Lila had accidentally admitted she needed to fix the money situation before anyone noticed. The prosecution pointed out the date 3 weeks before my visit. More evidence of planning. Mark Sullivan took the stand next. He looked smaller than I remembered, diminished by consequence. He confirmed everything under oath, the planning conversations, how Lila had prepared the basement in advance, her instructions about hiding my medication, and most damning, her backup plan to blame him. "She told me I was the perfect fall guy," Mark said flatly. "My fingerprints on the handcuffs, my car scene at the house. She said if it came down to it, she would tell everyone I was a violent ex-boyfriend who threatened her into helping. I was expendable from the beginning." Sarah testified next, her voice shaking but determined, as she told the jury about the $50,000 Lila had stolen years earlier. "I was afraid of her," Sarah admitted. "When I saw the news about Amy, I knew I couldn't stay quiet anymore." The forensic accountant presented charts showing $200,000, systematically embezzled from my parents' medical fund over 5 years. Cell phone location data proved Lila had never left the house during the time she claimed I had departed. Her phone had been pinging the same tower for the entire 48 hours I was imprisoned beneath her feet. With each new piece of evidence, Lila deteriorated visibly. She clenched her fists until her knuckles turned white. She shook her head repeatedly, as if she could deny reality through sheer will. She whispered frantically to her attorney, who could only respond with tight-lipped silence. The jury watched not just the evidence, but my sister's unraveling. Then the prosecutor called me for my final statement. I rose on shaking legs and walked toward the witness stand. As I passed Lila's table, our eyes met. For a moment, I saw the little sister I had once loved. Then something in her snapped. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Her attorney grabbed her arm. "Lila, sit down, now." But she wrenched free. She was never supposed to come back. The courtroom gasped. The judge's gavel pounded. The defendant will be seated. But Lila was beyond control. 15 years of pressure exploding. I gave everything to this family. 15 years. My career, my relationships, my entire life, while she got to leave. She got to be free. She got to build her precious career while I was stuck here. Tears of rage streamed down her face. And they still loved her more. Even when she wasn't there, everything was always about Amy. "We miss Amy. I wish Amy could visit more. Amy is so successful. Amy, Amy, Amy." Her voice cracked with fury. "That money was mine. I earned every dollar for every miserable year I spent in this prison of a family, and she had no right to come back and take everything from me. She should have stayed gone. She should have stayed invisible." Her attorney dropped his head into his hands. 2 bailiffs moved toward the defendant's table. Lila kept screaming even as they took her arms, her voice echoing off the courtroom walls until they forced her back into her seat. In her rage, she had confessed to motive, premeditation, and the entire psychological foundation of her crime all on the record in front of the jury. The verdict took less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts: attempted first-degree murder, kidnapping, embezzlement, fraud. The judge delivered the sentence: 28 years to life, no possibility of parole for 22 years. The Thanksgiving poisoning attempt would be investigated separately. Mark received 10 years with parole possible after 7. As bailiffs led Lila away, she looked back at me one final time. I expected hatred. Instead, I saw something like relief. The performance was finally over. After the verdict, my parents approached me in the courthouse hallway. They had aged years in months. Mom was crying, shoulders shaking. Dad could barely meet my eyes. "We failed you," Mom whispered. "We didn't see. We chose her. We chose what was easy to believe. We're so sorry. Amy." I looked at them for a long moment, the parents who made me invisible, who believed Lila's lies for years, who might have let me die in that basement without Aunt Ruth's persistence. Part of me wanted to embrace them, to say everything would be okay. But I knew that way had almost killed me. "I believe you're sorry," I said finally. "But sorry doesn't undo 36 years of choosing not to see me. Forgiveness isn't something I can give today, maybe someday. But if we're going to have any relationship, it will be built on truth, not on pretending everything is fine because that's more comfortable." I turned and walked out of the courthouse with Aunt Ruth at my side, into the afternoon sunlight, into a life that finally belonged to me. 1 year later, my foundation received its official status. I called it Visible, supporting survivors of family abuse. I had already been doing the work, speaking at support groups, writing my blog, connecting with other women made invisible by their own families. My first post went viral. In it I wrote, "For 36 years I was invisible. My sister tried to make me disappear forever. Instead, she gave me the greatest gift, the realization that I was worth fighting for." If you feel invisible, know this. You have been deliberately unseen by people who benefit from your silence. Step into the light. It's been waiting for you all along. Lila's appeal was denied. I maintain limited contact with my parents, now monthly phone calls, occasional visits. It's not the reconciliation they hoped for, but it's honest. And honesty, I have learned, is worth more than peace. Amy's story teaches us something that many of us learn too late in life. Silence is not a virtue when it protects those who harm us. For 36 years, Amy believed that staying quiet, accepting unfairness, and avoiding conflict was the price of belonging to her family. She thought that if she just kept her head down, if she never complained, if she made herself small enough, eventually her parents would see her, eventually her sister would treat her fairly, eventually things would get better. But they never did. Her silence only gave Lila permission to take more, lie more, manipulate more, and ultimately try to erase Amy completely. There is a lesson here for all of us, especially those of us who were raised to believe that good daughters stay quiet, that family loyalty means accepting mistreatment, that keeping the peace is more important than protecting ourselves. These beliefs are not wisdom. They are chains. And sometimes the people who benefit most from our silence are the very ones who taught us to stay quiet in the first place. If you recognize yourself in Amy's story, if you have ever felt invisible in your own family, dismissed by people who should love you, overlooked while others received praise for far less, or silenced to keep a peace that was never really peaceful, please know that your voice matters. You deserve to be seen. You deserve to be heard. You are not difficult for wanting honesty. You are not selfish for having needs. You are not asking for too much by expecting basic respect from the people in your life. Amy's survival was not an accident. She fought for herself when no one else would. She documented the truth. She refused to die in the darkness. And when she emerged, she did not pretend everything was fine just to make her parents comfortable. She chose honesty over false reconciliation. She chose her own peace over keeping peace for others. That is not cruelty. That is self-respect, and it is something many of us need to learn, no matter how old we are. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is stop accepting treatment we would never allow someone to give to a person we love. Sometimes the most powerful word we can speak is simply no more. Thank you for listening to the story today. If it touched your heart, made you think, or reminded you of someone you know, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel so you never miss another story like this one. We pour our hearts into bringing you these stories, and your support means everything to us. We would also love to hear from you in the comments below. Have you ever experienced something similar in your own family? How did you find your voice? How did you learn to stop being invisible? Your story might be exactly what another listener needs to hear today. You never know who you might help just by sharing your truth.